The first shot shattered the windows of the Blue Moon Diner. By the time the second came, Timber Lake was already under siege. Black SUVs blocked every road, helicopters thundered overhead, and soldiers poured into the streets. People thought Evelyn Ward was just a quiet librarian, until she picked up a weapon hidden for 10 years and fought like a ghost from another war. What happened that night would turn a small town into the front line of a secret battle and reveal a truth no one was ready to face. Timber Lake, Montana. A crisp autumn morning stretched over the lake, the water flat and silver, reflecting rows of pines that whispered secrets whenever the wind stirred them. The town seemed timeless, tucked between mountains and water, living at its own unhurried pace. At the edge of the square, the school library opened earlier than the church. Light spilled through the tall windows as Evelyn Ward stacked heavy books onto shelves. 38, slight of frame, hair tied neatly back, she carried herself with quiet efficiency. To the children, she was simply Miss Ward, the librarian who smiled faintly when they returned books late and insisted they use bookmarks instead of folding corners. But there was something off, something only a careful observer might notice. Evelyn never sat with her back to the door. Whenever someone walked in, her eyes flicked over them quickly, face, hands, posture as if measuring threat before softening again into that polite smile. People thought it was just a quirk, like tapping fingers on a desk. For Evelyn, it was survival. A reflex carved deep by years in places far from Timber Lake, places where hesitation meant death. She let the scent of paper and dust calm her breathing, convincing herself she could belong here. The town had given her 8 quiet years. 8 years to let her past fall away like autumn leaves. Or so she liked to believe. At night, after the doors were locked, she descended the narrow stairs behind a shelf of atlases. Beneath the floorboards, a steel door waited, keypad worn smooth from use. She tapped the code without hesitation. The lock clicked. The yellow light inside revealed another world. Weapons lined the walls. Handguns, assault rifles, knives. Maps covered the tables, marked with routes and names that didn't exist on any official record. A corner hummed with listening devices and encrypted radios. She pulled off her cardigan, exposing the scar that cut across her shoulder, a jagged reminder of Somalia. Her hand brushed a tactical vest hanging neatly on a rack, the words stitched inside the collar still intact. Colon Spector. Her old name. The CIS Ghost, the operative who could vanish into thin air and crawl out of missions no one else survived. A legend buried 8 years ago. Now it was just a memory. A part of her she kept buried beneath paperbacks and children's story hours. But every time she touched that vest, a part of Spector stirred. Not gone, never gone. Just waiting. 3 days later, the rhythm of town life broke. Evelyn heard the engines first, low, heavy, not the trucks that carried lumber or milk. From her library window she watched 3 gray vehicles roll into town and stop with practiced precision. Men in fire inspector uniforms climbed out. The way they moved betrayed them, shoulders square, eyes scanning, boots falling in formation. Soldiers dressed as civilians. Her heart tightened. 8 years of silence shattered with a single moment. When the leader pulled off her helmet, Evelyn froze. Isabel Cross had once been more than a partner. She was the only one who knew Spector had died 8 years ago. Their eyes met across the glass. No smile, just a short nod. Enough to say, "It's begun." Later in the dusty archive room, Cross wasted no time. "Your name's on the list," she whispered. A general selling files. Dead operatives, new identities. "You know what that means?" Evelyn didn't answer. The silence pressed heavy. Cross pressed on. "Worse, there's an old encryption protocol from 12 years ago. Black Swan, only you can crack it. If it's sold, the entire network burns." Evelyn steadied herself against the shelf, inhaling the smell of paper to ground her. "Why come here, Isabel? To drag me back?" "I came to keep you alive," Cross shot back. "If they know Spectre's still breathing, Timber Lake will be ground zero. And I think—" She hesitated, listening to the rumble outside. "I think it already is." That afternoon, alarms screamed through the school. 3 trucks blocked the lot. Armed men stormed inside. Teachers herded children into the gym. Evelyn left the library. Her glasses slipped off. Her eyes turned sharp. Spectre was awake. She moved through hallways in silence. One hand flicked the circuit breaker, plunging the building into darkness. The other tossed smoke charges cobbled from supplies no civilian should possess. Panic broke the formation. Children slipped through side exits. Guided by teachers Evelyn had already cleared a path for. The mercenaries fired blindly into haze, chasing echoes and shadows. By the time they reached the gym, the hostages were gone. All that remained were empty chairs, the smell of smoke, and casings scattered like breadcrumbs. Ghost signs. That night, in the hidden basement, Evelyn wiped blood off her sleeve. Cross stood in the doorway, staring at the arsenal. "You kept all this here?" "Some call it obsession," Evelyn muttered. "I call it preparation." Cross spread a map across the table. "The sale goes down in 2 weeks. A ship off Alaska. Research vessel on paper, weapons platform in reality. You know what that means?" Evelyn studied the map, remembering nights spent crawling through freezing surf to reach shorelines no one dared approach. "It means he doesn't want anyone walking out alive." "I need Spectre," Cross said. "Not the librarian." Evelyn's hand closed around the pistol on the table. The yellow light painted shadows of 2 women on the wall, 2 halves of the same coin. "Spectre's dead," she whispered. Then her eyes lifted, steel flashing beneath the quiet. "But if Timber Lake is threatened again, I'll bury them at the bottom of this lake." News of the electrical accident at the school spread quickly, neatly covering the truth. Townsfolk carried on, grateful nothing worse had happened. Evelyn knew better. That was just the prelude. She walked the streets before dawn, memorizing every alley, every power line, every escape route. Timber Lake wasn't just home. It was terrain, and terrain had to be mapped. At sunrise, she stood by the water. The lake glowed red with the first light. The whisper rose again inside her. "Spectre. Time to come back." The library opened as usual. Children poured in, laughing, arms full of books. Evelyn smiled softly, placing a fairy tale into a small boy's hands. No one noticed the thin blade strapped beneath her sleeve. No one knew the night before she disarmed a charge meant for the gym. She looked at the children, at the rows of books, at the fragile piece she'd built. If the general succeeded, this would all vanish. Evelyn Ward, the quiet librarian, could disappear tomorrow. But Spectre never would. Spectre was awake. The quiet lasted only a few days. Enough for the town to convince itself nothing unusual had happened. That the smoke at the school was a faulty breaker, nothing more. Timber Lake was good at pretending. Evelyn wished she could be by Thursday. She'd memorized the strangers. They came in pairs, tourists on the surface flannel shirts, boots too new, cameras hanging like props. They drank coffee at the diner, asked Betty about hiking trails, bought postcards no one ever really bought. But their eyes never lingered on the lake or the mountain. They lingered on her. She didn't flinch. She'd learned long ago that disappearing meant becoming part of the scenery. So she shelved books, wiped down counters, smiled at children. All the while she counted footsteps, measured breathing, noted the way their hands hovered near their jackets. Guns, concealed but not forgotten. Spectre cataloged them all. Friday evening, she locked the library and walked home under a bruised sky. Isabel Cross waited on her porch, a black duffel at her feet, jacket zipped to her throat. The tension between them felt like an old wound that had never closed. "They've tightened the net," Isabel said without greeting. "I noticed. They'll strike soon. And when they do, they won't care about collateral damage." Evelyn stepped past her, unlocking the door. Inside smelled of pine and paper, the faint warmth of a space lived in but rarely claimed. She set water to boil while Isabel lingered in the doorway like she wasn't sure she was welcome. "You're not here to warn me," Evelyn said finally. "No," Isabel admitted. "I'm here to recruit you." The silence stretched until the kettle screamed. "They've set the auction date," Isabel continued, her voice clipped. 2 weeks. Off the Aleutian coast. Disguised as a research expedition. 40 confirmed buyers, each with enough blood on their hands to drown in. Evelyn poured the water slowly, steam curling between them. "And you want me to what? Swim out there and crash the party?" "Something like that. You've got teams, younger, cleaner. Why not send them?" "Because the encryption is yours. Black Swan. No one else can unlock it. If the files sell, every ghost operative left alive will be burned. Including you." Evelyn set the cup down with deliberate care. She hated how her hand trembled. "You're saying I don't have a choice. I'm saying if you don't come, 43 people die in the shadows. And you'll watch your town burn next." The words landed heavy. Isabel always knew where to press. Evelyn closed her eyes, saw the school gym filled with children, saw smoke curling through beams, saw the guns she'd turned away in silence. Timber Lake wasn't built for crossfire. It would shatter with one push. 2 weeks, she said. "But we do it my way." The training began that night. The hidden basement lit up, shelves stripped of dust as Evelyn moved with precision that frightened Isabel even after years. She assembled rifles blindfolded, tested radios, rewired detonators. Her body remembered every motion. It was muscle memory, deeper than thought. "You never stopped," Isabel murmured, watching from the stairs. "Stopping gets you killed. You built all this under a library." Jesus Ward. Everyone needs a hobby. The days blurred. Morning, she shelved books. Evening, she sprinted through the woods, lungs burning, timing every route to the second. Isabel shadowed her, sometimes keeping pace, sometimes falling behind. Evelyn said nothing. She wasn't here to teach. One night, Isabel leaned against a pine, panting hard, and whispered, "What are you after, really? Redemption?" Evelyn wiped sweat from her face, eyes on the moon cutting through branches. Survival, but the truth tasted like ash. Because beneath the word lingered another, revenge. The storm broke on the 7th day. The mercenaries came at dawn. Not in disguise this time, no flannel, no cameras. Black vans. Suppressors on rifles. Clean entry into Timber Lake like they owned it. Evelyn woke before the first window shattered. Instinct pulled her to the floor, gun in hand before her mind caught up. She rolled into the hallway, firing twice at the shadows climbing through broken glass. 2 fell without sound. "Library," she hissed into her earpiece. "Copy," Isabel answered from her post 2 streets away. "They're sweeping fast." "Not locals. Too disciplined. They don't need locals," Evelyn said. "They only need me." She bolted through the back door, slipping into the forest. Her boots barely touched soil, every step memorized from years of drills. Behind her, shouts rose. Lights slashed the trees, but the forest belonged to her. She wove through deer paths, vanished behind moss-draped trunks, left no trace. Spectre wasn't running. Spectre was hunting. Minutes later, 3 bodies cooled in the undergrowth. Radios crackled with confusion. Phantom movement. Repeat, phantom movement. Lost visual. Spectre smiled in the dark. The old name fit like armor. By nightfall, Timber Lake was quiet again. Too quiet. Civilians huddled indoors, lights off, trusting Sheriff Donovan to keep order. But Donovan wasn't equipped for this war. Neither was anyone in town. Evelyn stood on the ridge above, binoculars raised. The vans had left. Not a retreat, just repositioning. She knew how these operations worked. The first sweep softened the ground. The second planted the trap. "They'll be back," she said. "Then we go before they return," Isabel urged. "We have a boat waiting in Kodiak. 2 days' sail to the coordinates." Evelyn lowered the binoculars. The lake shimmered with starlight, fragile, beautiful. She wanted to believe she could protect it by staying. But protection meant striking first. "Fine," she said. "Let's end this." The voyage north was a blur of gray water and colder wind. Their vessel was an old trawler, paint-chipped, engines loud enough to rattle teeth. A cover story of marine research carried them past casual inspection. Isabel worked the radios, feeding false chatter into enemy frequencies. Evelyn spent her hours in the hold, checking gear, rehearsing entry points. At night she sat alone on deck, staring at endless waves, remembering the missions no one ever spoke about. The ones that ended with empty seats on helicopters, names erased from walls, bodies left in places maps didn't acknowledge. She thought of Alex. Her brother had been one of them. "Dead," the file said. But files lead. Files were written to bury the truth. If Holloway had him, if the rumors were real, then this wasn't just about 43 ghosts. It was about family. They sighted the yacht on the 5th night. At first it looked like a jewel in the dark. White lights glittering, music faintly drifting over water. A billionaire's indulgence. But through night vision lenses, the illusion dissolved. Armored hull. Jamming towers. Automated turrets disguised as antennae. "This isn't a yacht," Isabel whispered. "It's a fortress." Evelyn adjusted her mask, checked the rebreather. "Good. Fortresses have blind spots. You're really going in alone?" "You'll draw fire. I'll slip beneath." "That's the plan." Isabel grabbed her wrist. "Evelyn, if you don't make it, then finish the mission." The sea swallowed her before Isabel could answer. The water was knives, cutting through her wetsuit, stealing breath even with the rebreather steady. She swam with long strokes, magnets clamped to her belt. The yacht loomed larger, a steel leviathan blotting stars. She reached the loading bay, clamped to the hull, bypassed sensors with hands that never hesitated. A hatch groaned open. She slid inside. Warmth hit her first. Then the sound of voices, Russian, Mandarin, Arabic blending into the low hum of expensive power. She moved through maintenance shafts, every shadow her ally. The mask came off. The pistol came out. At last, she reached the conference room. Through the grate she saw them, buyers in tailored suits, eyes gleaming with greed. And at the head of the table, Admiral Nathan Holloway, hair silver now but smile unchanged. He looked older, heavier, but the arrogance was intact. Behind him, bound to a chair, head bowed, sat Alex. Alive. Her heart lurched. For 8 years she'd buried him. 8 years she'd lived with the guilt of leaving him in Mogadishu. And here he was breathing, beaten but breathing. Holloway raised a file. Her file, photographs from missions erased from history. Psychological profiles stripped bare. Even recent pictures from Timber Lake. Grainy shots of her walking to the library. "Tonight," Holloway said, his voice amplified through the room, "you will purchase more than intelligence. You will purchase ghosts. And ghosts, as you know, are priceless." The buyers laughed softly, the sound like glass breaking. Evelyn's pulse steadied. Her fingers closed around 2 flashbangs. Time to remind them what a ghost really was. Light, sound, chaos. The grenades erupted, throwing the room into blinding confusion. Evelyn dropped through the vent, boots hitting the table, guns barking. Buyers dove for cover. Holloway cursed, dragging Alex's chair toward the exit. "Spectre," he hissed, recognition twisting his face. She advanced without hesitation, weaving through smoke, each shot deliberate. Suits fell. Guards scrambled. Alex lifted his head, eyes locking onto hers. For the first time in years, hope burned there. "Stay down." She shouted, cutting his restraints with a blade swift as lightning. They moved together, brother and sister, back to back as Holloway fled toward the bridge. The fight ripped through corridors, stairwells, decks. Evelyn was unstoppable, years of silence erupting into fury. Every bullet was a reckoning, every strike a release. At last she cornered Holloway on the bridge. Alarms wailing, red lights painting the room. "You were dead," he spat. "I buried you myself. You should have dug deeper." He raised a pistol. She fired first. The shot shattered glass, but not him. He ducked, scrambling for the console. His hand slammed a red switch. Explosives. The yacht shuddered beneath their feet. Alex grabbed her arm. He rigged the ship. Smoke poured from vents. Flames licked corridors. Holloway laughed, broken and desperate. "If I fall, everything falls with me." Evelyn kicked the pistol from his hand, slammed him against the console. Her blade pressed to his throat. "Give me the codes. Kill me, and this ship burns to the waterline." "Then you don't understand me," she whispered. "I don't need you alive." Her pressure tightened. Holloway broke faster than she expected, spitting numbers, gasping for air. She keyed them in, disengaging the detonators one by one until silence replaced the beeping countdown. The ship lived, barely. Holloway sagged, defeated. Alex tied him with wire, leaving him on the floor. Sirens still wailed. Enemy boats closed in. But the files were theirs, copied onto drives that could save 43 lives. On deck, Isabel's voice crackled through the earpiece. "Extraction inbound." 2 minutes. Evelyn helped Alex toward the rail. He stumbled, but his grip was strong. "You came back," he said. "I never left," she answered, pulling him close before diving into the sea as the first rescue lights broke the horizon. By dawn, the yacht burned behind them, smoke rising like a funeral pyre. The Coast Guard secured Holloway. Isabel handed the drives to Colonel Santos, who arrived on a cutter silent and grim. "You stopped the sail," Santos said. "But this isn't over." Evelyn stood at the rail, hair dripping, uniform clinging. "It never is." Alex leaned beside her, eyes on the horizon. "What now?" She thought of Timber Lake, the library, the shelves, the children's laughter. "I go home," she said. "Home?" "Yes, and this time, not as a ghost. Just as me." The sea stretched endless, but for the first time in 8 years, Evelyn felt the weight lift. Spectre had returned, not to haunt, but to protect. And maybe, just maybe, to finally live. The Coast Guard cutter reached the harbor at dawn, the air sharp with salt and jet fuel. News cameras were kept far away, their feeds choked by federal blackouts. Officially, nothing had happened in the northern waters. The burning yacht was logged as a maritime accident. Survivors were listed as crewmen of no consequence. The truth was buried before it could surface. Evelyn Ward walked down the gangway with her brother at her side, their steps out of rhythm, both carrying scars invisible to the uniformed sailors who saluted in passing. Alex had lost weight, his skin pale, eyes hollow from years in captivity, but there was steel in him still. Evelyn saw it in the way he scanned the horizon, the way he measured exits automatically. Prison hadn't broken him. It had only forged him into something sharper. "You can't go back to Timber Lake," Isabel Cross warned as they reached the dock. Her hair was windblown, her jacket torn, but her eyes burned with conviction. "Holloway's network isn't gone. We clipped one head off a hydra. The rest will come looking." "I don't care," Evelyn said flatly. "You should. I've spent 8 years pretending to be someone else, Isabel. And in that time, Timber Lake became more than cover. It became mine. If they come, they'll find I'm not the same ghost they buried." Alex studied her, his jaw tight. "Home isn't what it was, Evie. You step back into that library, you're not just endangering yourself. You're painting a target on everyone who ever smiled at you." She wanted to argue, but his words lodged deep. Betty's laugh behind the counter, the children's trust. Sheriff Donovan's morning nods. All those fragile threads of normalcy were already at risk. Yet the thought of running again made her chest ache. Colonel Santos arrived in a dark sedan, boots crunching against gravel. She saluted Evelyn like a soldier returned from war. Even though Evelyn had long ago burned her uniform, "You stopped a disaster," Santos said. "But we're not done. Holloway's sale was just one channel. There are others. Foreign buyers will adapt, shift, regroup. And every surviving Black Swan asset is still a target." "I'm not coming back," Evelyn said quickly. Before the colonel could ask, Santos's lips twitched into the faintest smile. "I figured. But understand this, you don't get to choose the war. Sometimes it chooses you." She handed Evelyn a sealed folder, coordinates, names, shadows of men and women who'd vanished into civilian lives, just like Evelyn had. 43 ghosts, Santos said softly. "Not all of them as prepared as you." When the colonel drove away, silence pressed down. The sea behind them rolled endlessly, swallowing secrets. Evelyn held the folder without opening it, feeling its weight like a stone. Back in Timber Lake, autumn had deepened. The pines burned gold at their tips. The air carried wood smoke and the faint echo of children's laughter. From the outside, nothing had changed. The diner's neon still buzzed. The sheriff's cruiser still sat crooked outside the station, and the school bell still rang sharp at 8. But Evelyn felt it the moment she stepped onto Main Street. Conversations faltered. Eyes lingered too long. People who once saw her as a quiet librarian now carried questions they didn't dare voice. She was no longer invisible. Betty Nakamura hugged her fiercely, whispering, "Where were you?" Evelyn could only answer with a strained smile. Sheriff Donovan cornered her that evening, leaning against his cruiser, eyes searching. "You've got the look of someone who's seen more than a library shelf," he said. "I don't know what storm you're bringing, Ward, but this town's not built for it." "I know," she admitted. "That's why I'm staying." He studied her a long time, then nodded. "Then we'll stand with you. But you'd better tell me when the wolves come, so I'm not holding a pea shooter against a pack." Night in Timber Lake was different now. She patrolled the town quietly, boots silent on pine needles, eyes tracing shadows no one else noticed. She cached weapons in barns, hid radios in attics, memorized escape routes through alleys and woods. The library became more than a library. It became a fortress of paper and steel. Alex stayed with her in a cabin at the edge of the lake, his recovery slow but steady. Some nights, he woke screaming in languages not his own. Evelyn sat with him in silence until the tremors passed. They never spoke of what Holloway had done. They didn't need to. One evening, as the sun bled across the water, Alex broke the quiet. "You know they'll come again. You and me were unfinished business." "I know," she said. "Then we don't wait. We hunt." The words stirred something she thought she'd buried. Not revenge. Not yet. But inevitability. She opened Santos's folder. Coordinates glared back at her. Safe houses. Code names. Places where ghosts like her tried to live quiet lives. Each one a target waiting to burn. Evelyn closed the folder, the pine-scented air heavy in her lungs. Timber Lake had given her a sanctuary. Now it would give her a base. If war was coming, she would meet it here. On her own terms. The ghost was done hiding. Spectre was home. Timber Lake woke to a new kind of morning, one that smelled less of wood smoke and more of anticipation. The town arranged itself in the same neat rows it always had: diner, post office, sheriff's station, but the rhythm had changed. People moved with the small carefulness of those who'd learned to listen for unfamiliar noises. Conversations shortened. Eyes checked the tree line more often than the weather. Evelyn watched all of it from behind the library's front desk, where she pretended to stamp due dates and shelve paperbacks. The little rituals kept a surface of normalcy. Children still came to story hour. Betty still argued about the right pie crust for autumn festivals. But beneath those routines, something else stirred. Strategy conversations over coffee. Late-night meetings at the firehouse. Neighborly hands learning how to hide a radio under a floorboard. She had turned the library into a map room. Books sat in tidy rows while corners of the reading room held dry rations, medical kits, and an improvised armory behind false back shelves. She had taught Sheriff Donovan how to use an encrypted radio. She had shown Betty how to make a Molotov from a soup can and a rag an ugly necessary education in the anatomy of survival. Those were ugly lessons for gentle hands, but Betty learned with a stubbornness that made Evelyn trust her even more. Word spread in different ways. Some came because Isabel Cross called them directly old contacts who owed favors and returned them. Others arrived on the wings of rumor, people who once worked for agencies and had no place left to go. A few came because they'd seen the grainy photos that had leaked after the yacht incident. A woman with damp hair, a man with hollow eyes, a name people whispered like a prayer. They came because they could not stand the thought of Holloway's network training a new harvest of hunters. Timber Lake was not built for war. Its supply lines were a country road, its medical facilities a clinic with one doctor. The town's real advantages were simple and stubborn. The lake, the pines, the lessons of people who'd lived in weather. Evelyn turned those advantages into traps. She taught small groups how to move silently through the woods, how to set a perimeter without leaving obvious tracks. She walked dogs of habit into backyards to measure sight lines, then set camouflaged mirrors to peek around corners. Children's playgrounds became observation posts. Fishing boats were fitted to be quiet ambush craft. It was improvisation, makeshift and sometimes cruel, but it was also something more. A moral contouring of a community that refused to be victimized. There were arguments at first. Sheriff Donovan balked at booby traps on the road to the school. "If a kid gets a splinter, I'm arresting you," he said, trying to smile and failing. Betty countered with the blunt logic of someone who'd run a diner through blackouts and snowstorms. "We either stop a bus full of killers or we lose your kids." "I'll take the splinter." They set rules then, because towns need rules to keep themselves humane. No traps on main roads during daylight. Evacuation plans for the school and the church. The elderly would go to the inn on Main Street. Mrs. Calhoun could host up to 12 and make a mean pot of stew that would keep people talking. No one was to shoot unless ordered by the sheriff or impossible circumstances demanded otherwise. They would avoid killing when possible. That was the human trap that broke communities faster than any enemy. Evelyn watched them learn and be taught, and she taught without the theatrics of legend. Spectre was many things, but she had always been a technician. She showed men and women how to use shadows as armor, how to improvise a decoy, where to put a mirror to turn an opponent's sight into their weakness. When she demonstrated the simplest mock grenade in old coffee can, a handful of nails, a timed ignition, a hush fell over the group. They were not spectators to a story now. They were actors with lines to remember. Alex did not return to his old work. He could not. He walked the town like someone cataloging treasure, which buildings could be defended, which cellars would flood in a storm, where a cache of canned goods could last through a siege. At odd hours he repaired engines and taught boys how to handle a boat without letting bloodlust teach them to handle a rifle. He joked, sometimes badly, about being a handyman for the resistance, and that made people laugh. Laughter mattered. It was a wedge that kept despair from settling for good. Holloway's retreats and remnants did not sit idle. The Admiral's network was a spidery thing. Private contractors, corrupted officials, men who once wore uniforms and now answered to credit and fear. They probed Timber Lake as a blind man probes a new room with a cane, uncertain and careful. They tried locals first. An out-of-town logger who had an interest in land prices and asked too many questions about evacuation routes. He vanished one morning after a hike and was reported missing. Timber Lake grew used to the silence of absence, holes left in conversation like teeth. The first direct strike came at dusk 3 weeks after the yacht. A convoy of 2 black SUVs moved down County 7, not fast enough to appear merely passing through. They parked beside the old feed mill and sent men in with falsified permits to survey the grain silos. The men were precise. They checked roofs. They planted listening devices. They used drones to map the town in patterns that made Evelyn's skin crawl. They left as quietly as they'd arrived, which was what made the townspeople's blood run cold. No one saw them go, and yet the air felt different when they did. Isabel called it a probing attack. They're gauging response time, communications lapses. How quickly you move civilians, she said, when she came with a team that night. She stayed in the inn, and over a pot of stew, Mrs. Calhoun's pot that now tasted like duty, the plan was laid out. They'll escalate, she warned. They always do. They did escalate. The next raid came at 3 in the morning. A team tried to take the radio mast on the hill. The mast had been rigged to appear active but tethered to a battery bank under the old school gym. When the men cut the line, expecting to silence messages, they stepped into a lane of angled mirrors and pigmented dust Evelyn had spread to throw off thermal imaging. The sound they made metallic, surprised, reverberated down the ridge. Donovan's deputies were waiting. 2 men were captured. They were younger than expected and broke under a calm, ugly pressure of interrogation. From them the town learned names: cell commanders, payment handlers, a rumor that Holloway had put bounties on traces, not people. That knowledge hardened resolve. It also widened the moral field. They no longer pretended they were only defending themselves. They were teachers and bakers in a town that had become a front, and that demanded a kind of courage the world did not often celebrate. The morning after the massed raid, a national news van skidded into Main Street and parked with the arrogant clunk of people who expected stories to be simple. A reporter in a windbreaker used his mic like a lure. "Residents of Timber Lake, have you noticed any unusual activity?" he asked, smiling as if the question were a local curiosity. Isabel didn't like the attention, and neither did Evelyn. "We're managing local matters," Sheriff Donovan said, hands flat against the interview table. "We appreciate help from the state police." The reporter pushed his card across the table and asked, "Can anyone comment on rumors that a former classified asset lives here?" Evelyn felt the paper fold of silence. The reporter's pen scratched. The town's heartbeat sped. She could have answered, could have admitted everything and asked for formal protection. Her hand curled into a fist against her hip. She felt the outline of her pistol under her cardigan, and thought how a protective call to federal channels always brought a paperwork trail and reminders that Holloway's allies still had influence. She thought of the yacht, of the men who sold off brothers and sisters for money. "No," she said softly. "We're handling it." That answer changed the tenor of their lives. The reporter left with footage of a town pretending to be sleepy, with a voiceover about mysterious visitors. The piece ran on local stations with grainy footage and an undertone of adventure. It brought curiosity seekers, and worse, outsiders who were more interested in quick fame than stewardship. Soon, strangers with flashier gear than the first 2 SUVs began to appear, fans of the human drama. They camped at the roadside. They took photos and posted them online. Some left care packages and letters of support, courage cookies, as Betty called them. Others left messages that suggested an audience, a crowd that might tip the balance in a future fight. The social noise complicated operations, and Evelyn found herself making compromises with the absurdity of modern warfare. False social media accounts to throw off trackers, staged stories to confuse the algorithm, and honest, ugly conversations with neighbors about how a photograph could map a patrol route. Then came the wintering. Snow came early, applause of white that covered tracks and muffled sound. It became both friend and enemy. The town could disappear more easily when everything matched white, but movement left tracks that were obvious and betraying. Holloway's teams learned that too. They sent winter-trained units who moved like ghosts across the drifts. Evelyn's greatest fear was not the men with rifles, but the erosion of the town's soul. She watched young men start to taste the idea of violence, like a cruel liquor powerful and intoxicating, and she worked to redirect that taste into something else. She taught them to jury-rig water heaters, to patch roofs, to help the old man in the trailer park keep his wood stove alive. She taught them how to hold a rifle and not think of it as a solution, but as a sorrow. There were nights when she heard them, the distant chuff of engines, the hum of drones, the muffled chatter over radio frequencies that Isabel managed to intercept. There were nights when Alex sat by the stove and rolled a cigarette between fingers weakened by years of undernourishment and abuse. He looked at her across the blue glow of the map table and asked, without rancor, "Do you think they'll come for Mrs. Calhoun's stew?" She smiled despite it. "They might," she said. "But they'll have to get through us first." The first big assault arrived on a Monday. That was supposed to mark the town's harvest festival. Tables had been set in the square. Kids had drawn chalk on the sidewalk. Holloway's men chose that day because it had noise, because it would cover their approach. A convoy rolled at dawn 3 SUVs, a truck with a camper shell, and a half-dozen ATVs that ripped through brush with a terrible hunger. They moved with lethal efficiency. They took the bakery on Main Street as a staging post and used the diner as a temporary command post for operators. Men in the convoy carried light but effective weaponry. They were not full-scale military, they were killers tasked. As Holloway's network worked with targeted terror, not territorial conquest. The town had 3 hours. That was all. Evelyn and the defenders used every trick they had rehearsed. The school gym's lights stayed off, the windows blacked. The children ferried out through back alleys and into Mrs. Calhoun's cellar with blankets and quiet songs. Men who had once fixed tractors became roadblock teams, dismantling fences, setting harmless-looking obstacles that hid spikes and tripwires. 2 ATVs met a diversion that sent them careening into a pre-positioned ditch. Their drivers crawled out bruised and angry. A squad tried to scale the feed mill's roof and found themselves flanked by men who had learned to move in silence. Holloway's men were good, but they were not Timber Lake. The fighting was never cinematic. It was clumsy and human gunfire that shredded hardwood and shattered porcelain. Adrenaline doing strange math in frightened bodies, the smell of heated metal and boiled stew. There was heroism in the small acts. The schoolteacher who carried a child on her back through a rain of snow. The baker who hid the wounded under flour sacks and kept the rest fed. Officers who had never fired a shot before found themselves aim true because the stakes were everything. At noon, a mortar round slammed into the square and collapsed a corner of Main Street. The baker's shop was gone. A woman screamed. Betty kept baking. Her hands did not stop. When the smoke finally cleared late that night, the town had held the line. They had bled. Some had died, men who had been practiced for the enemy, but no one had relinquished Timber Lake entirely. Isabel, with the hard grace of a soldier who had seen worse, called in a favor that skirted legality. A cargo plane, its manifest innocuous, arrived at the county strip carrying armor plates and medical trailers. Colonel Santos's people moved in to secure the most vulnerable locations. It was a temporary reprieve, a bulwark of metal that would not fix what broke in people's hearts during that day. But it was something. After the assault, the town smelled of iron and wet ash. Plastic tarps covered ruined windows. Children had new questions that ghosted in their small faces. Evelyn moved through it all, arranging where to place blankets, how to rotate watch shifts so no one fell into the dangerous groove of exhaustion. She spent an hour by the river collecting names, because names anchored grief to something that could be honored rather than erased by the press of duty. At night, when the town tried to sleep, Evelyn sat alone in the map room, staring at lines on paper that had once been peaceful. The folder Santos had given her sat open like a promise and a threat. There were dozens more names there, safe houses across states and countries, People who might wake one morning to a silence, and then a knock on the door. She thought of the moral calculus that had become daily life. Who to tell? Who to hide? Who to sacrifice? She had an answer for herself that she whispered into the darkness. Timber Lake stands, she told the empty room. I stand. Word spread of Timber Lake's resistance the way stubborn things spread, by witnesses who survived and by enemies who needed to brag. A kernel of strange pride began to accumulate around the town, a dangerous thing because pride can turn soldiers into martyrs, and make a place a legend that attracts more enemies. Evelyn watched that phenomenon with both satisfaction and dread. Finally, as winter thinned into a brittle spring, a courier from Isabel brought a photograph. It was black and white and grainy, taken from a distance. A man in an unremarkable coat signing papers in a safe house. A man who looked a lot like one of Holloway's lieutenants. Under it, a single typed line. They have friends. They have reach. They will return with more. Evelyn folded the photograph and tucked it into her vest over the old scar. She thought of Alex across the table, awake now most nights, tossing plans and mending arms. She was honest with him in a way she had not been in years. If they come again, we will be ready, she said. Alex nodded, his jaw a soft wire of resolve. I don't want Timber Lake to be a war memorial, he said. We need a plan that ends them for good. Evelyn thought of endings and how dangerous they are. Who gets to decide the end of men like Holloway? Courts? Assassins? Whispers in the dark? She did not have an answer. She only knew the shape of the present. Timber Lake had become a line in the sand, and she, Evelyn Ward, had drawn it. When spring rolled the snow back and a tentative sun warmed the roads, the town planted seeds in the ground as if active life could make the world kinder. Children were taught to read maps and also to hide quietly when an engine hummed too close. People told stories again, stories that would eventually be told as legend, and then distorted into something else. In the middle of it, Evelyn walked the library aisles, hands on spines, trying to keep this small normal alive, because that small normal was what war had never yet managed to take entirely. But she knew they would not forever be safe. Holloway's network had reach. Money and influence deepened roots, even in places that claimed to be isolated. The next confrontation would not be the same as the last. Holloway had learned, and so had Timber Lake. And in that learning, Evelyn felt a cold truth. There are always more ghosts to wake, more doors that open to the trails. She laid out new maps and circled points in red. She met with Donovan and Isabel and a ragged council that had become the town's backbone. They argued about the line between defense and vengeance. They argued about whether to take the fight beyond Timber Lake, to hit the safe houses on the map, to track down payment nodes, to dismantle networks, knowing full well that every action carried consequence. Sometimes staying still was strategy. Sometimes movement was salvation. At dusk, when she walked down Main Street, people saw her and smiled, because it was something they could do. For them, she was just a librarian who had saved their kids. For others, she was a legend who had no intention of vanishing again. She took the smiles like a fuel and kept walking toward the river, toward the map room, toward the next problem that needed solving. The town had become a front line by accident and by choice. It had become, unwillingly, a crucible that would alter more than buildings. People were learning how to cross lines they had never thought to meet. They were learning how to be courageous and how to grieve and how to nurse others. They were learning how to be cruel if that cruelty kept their children alive. They were learning how to become what they had feared. Evelyn thought of Spectre and of the library and wondered whether a person could hold both legends and ordinary life in the same ribs. She decided they must. She decided that Timber Lake's future would be a strange mixture of both books and bullets, lullabies and watch shifts. And when on a late spring morning, the first snowmelt rush freed a branch that revealed a worn path in the woods, one that had not been trodden by neighbors, Evelyn knew that Holloway's men were moving closer again. The line would hold, or it would break. Either way, Timber Lake had been changed. It would no longer be a place where people came to forget. It would become a place people came to remember. She lit a lamp by the map table and traced a new route with her finger. The names were still there, the coordinates still scrawled in faded ink. The town had become a map, and they were its cartographers. The fight was not won. It had barely begun. But for the first time in a long time, Evelyn felt something that was not fear, a fierce, slow certainty, as if some part of her had always known that the world might demand this of her, and that she could, in the end, answer. The thaw came late that spring, and with it came a new kind of silence. Snowmelt carried away the last traces of the firefight, but the town still felt brittle, like glassware set too close to the edge of a shelf. Windows were patched with plywood, bullet holes painted over, but the scars beneath remained. Evelyn saw it every time a truck backfired on Main Street, and half the townsfolk flinched. Sheriff Donovan doubled his patrols, but he wasn't blind. "They're not just coming with guns next time," he muttered one night, leaning against the hood of his cruiser. "They'll come with lies. Divide a place, and you don't have to burn it. It burns itself." He was right. The first wave came not with engines, but with envelopes. Letters slipped under doors, unsigned but printed on clean paper, promising relocation money to families who wanted to leave Timber Lake. "We know you've suffered," one read. "Take the payout. Start fresh. Don't die for someone else's secrets." Some families took them seriously. Others burned them in stoves. But the seed of doubt had been planted. Then came the broadcasts. A van with an oversized antenna parked at the edge of town, leaking radio signals that bled into old AM stations. "Your so-called protectors are the reason you're in danger," the voice said, smooth and authoritative. "The librarian, the sheriff, the outsiders, they've brought war to your homes. Walk away, and you'll live." Betty Nakamura unplugged every radio in the diner. "I don't serve fear with my coffee," she told anyone who asked. But Evelyn knew it was only the beginning. At night, she walked the streets, not looking for snipers but for whispers. She heard them in the church steps, in the hushed tones of parents carrying children home. Some whispered about leaving, some about fighting, and some about whether Evelyn Ward had cursed their town by staying. Alex saw it too. "They don't need to pull a trigger," he said. "They just need you to doubt yourself. That's how they'll break Timber Lake." Evelyn didn't answer. She was already thinking of counters. Not more weapons. Not more traps. Something quieter. She started with Story Hour. Children came to the library as they always had. But now she read them tales of heroes who were not warriors, farmers who saved villages by stubborn planting, sisters who braved storms by holding hands, towns that stood because they refused to fall apart. The parents listened too, pretending they were only there for their kids. Evelyn saw how they straightened, how their shoulders eased a little when the stories ended. It wasn't victory, but it was something. Then she began inviting neighbors into the basement, not just deputies or Isabel's team, but the baker, the mechanic, the schoolteacher. She showed them maps. She explained the patterns of the enemy, not to frighten them, but to give them ownership of the fight. If they were going to be targets, they might as well know the battlefield. "Sheriff." Donovan shook his head when he saw the crowd packed into the library's hidden room. "This is a militia," he said. "No," Evelyn corrected softly. "This is a town." But not everyone agreed. The following week, Mr. Garrison, the mill owner, stood in the town square, red-faced, shouting that Timber Lake had become a hostage. "We should hand her over," he roared. "Let them take their ghost, and leave us in peace." The words cut deeper than any bullet. Evelyn stood on the edge of the crowd, listening as neighbors shifted, unsure. Alex stepped forward before she could. His voice carried, rough but steady. "Peace doesn't come from surrender. You hand her over, you hand me over too." And the next name on their list. And the next. And when they're done, there'll be no one left to protect you." Silence followed. Not agreement, not yet. But silence was better than surrender. That night Evelyn stood at the lake's edge, the water black under starlight. Isabel joined her, hands buried in her jacket. "They're softening you up," Isabel said. "Psychological warfare, classic. Next they'll send someone who looks like a friend. Someone you trust." Evelyn's eyes stayed on the dark water. "Then we trust carefully." The attack came sooner than she thought. A convoy of SUVs never appeared. No drones buzzed overhead. Instead, a stranger walked into the diner at noon, broad-shouldered, calm, carrying a duffel that looked ordinary. He ordered coffee, sat at a corner booth, smiled at Betty like he'd been there a dozen times before. When he finally looked up, his eyes locked on Evelyn through the window. She froze. She knew that face. "Michael Reeves," Isabel whispered beside her. "He died in Syria." I saw the file, but Michael Reeves was sitting in Timber Lake, alive, smiling. And if he was alive, it meant one of two things. The files were wrong, or Holloway had just sent a ghost to break her town from the inside. The diner's bell jingled as Evelyn stepped inside. The place smelled of bacon grease and burnt coffee, same as always, but the air was tight, strung taut as wire. Every pair of eyes flicked between her and the man in the corner booth. Michael Reeves. He looked older than memory, a beard peppered with gray, haircut military short, shoulders still square beneath a worn jacket. His duffel sat at his feet like a loyal dog. When Betty poured his coffee, his smile was so natural it cut deep. "Evia," he said, voice low, smooth. "You're hard to find." Her hand hovered near the pistol at her hip, hidden beneath her cardigan. She remembered Syria, the mission gone black, the explosion that had buried half a unit. Reeves was supposed to be gone. She'd mourned him. She'd carried his name like a stone. "You're dead," she said flatly. He chuckled. "That's what they told you." "That's what they told me too." Turns out death is just paperwork, depending on who's writing the files. Around them, the townsfolk sat in frozen silence. Sheriff Donovan had one hand on his holster. Betty's knuckles whitened on the coffee pot. Isabel slipped in through the side door, eyes narrowing. "Why here?" Evelyn asked. Reeves leaned back, sipped his coffee like they were catching up at a reunion. "Because here is where the story is. Holloway's gone, but his people aren't. They've scattered. Some want revenge. Some want redemption, me." He spread his hands. "I want answers." "I figured you might too." It was too clean. Too rehearsed. Evelyn's instincts screamed trap. "Prove it," she said. He shrugged. "Alex, remember Yemen? He carried me 3 clicks with a busted leg. You remember that? You remember the song he sang to keep us both awake?" Alex stiffened from his seat by the window. He hadn't moved since Reeves walked in. Now he whispered, almost to himself, that song wasn't Yemen. It was Mogadishu. Reeves blinked once, then smiled wider. Details get blurry after a while. The diner filled with a sharp silence, louder than any gunshot. Evelyn saw it, then the slip. The kind of mistake no brother-in-arms would ever make. She drew her pistol under the table. "Who sent you?" Reeves raised his hands, palms out, calm as a priest. "Nobody sent me. I'm here on my own. You want me gone, I'll walk out. But you'll never know if you just let another ghost vanish into the woods." Isabel stepped forward. "Or maybe you're the bait. Maybe they're outside right now, waiting for us to waste bullets on the wrong man." Evelyn's pulse thundered. She looked around the diner. Faces she loved, faces she swore to protect, all staring, waiting for her to choose what to believe. She holstered her pistol, but her voice cut sharp. "Search him." Donovan moved fast, patting Reeves down, pulling a folded radio from his jacket, a thin knife from his boot, a burner phone from the duffel. The phone buzzed once before Donovan could kill it. Reeves didn't flinch. "They know I'm here," he said. "And they'll come." That was when the first shot cracked through the diner's front window. Glass exploded inward. Patrons dove under tables. Donovan cursed, dragging Reeves to the floor. Evelyn hit the ground rolling, already calculating angles, already tasting the fight. Isabel shouted orders, her team flooding in through the back. Outside, engines roared. Shadows moved between parked cars. Timber Lake was under siege again, and this time, the enemy had walked right through the front door. The first bullet ripped through the diner window, exploding glass into a storm of shards. Betty screamed for everyone to get down. Evelyn's pistol was already in her hand before the glass hit the floor. Outside, 3 SUVs screeched sideways into Main Street, doors flying open, black-clad men pouring out with practiced precision. "Positions!" Evelyn barked. Her voice carried like a hammer through the chaos. Isabel rolled into cover, rifle already spitting fire. Sheriff Donovan shoved civilians behind overturned tables, his revolver heavy in his hand. Alex rose from his chair, blood pounding through veins that had once been drilled in deserts and jungles, and pulled a shotgun from under the counter. Reeves lay cuffed on the floor, smiling through the panic. "You feel it, don't you?" he murmured at Evelyn. "The war never left you." Evelyn ignored him. She ducked out the side door and into the street. The night was alive with gunfire. Bullets sparked against brick. A storefront window shattered. A dog barked wildly before someone dragged it into safety. Down the street, headlights swung like searching eyes. 2 ATVs tore toward the square, engines screaming. But the mechanics' traps' hidden wires strung low across the road snared their wheels, flipping both riders into the snow. The crowd on the rooftops opened fire. Farmers and hunters who had become sharpshooters overnight. The mercenaries regrouped, pushing toward the school. Evelyn's heart-seized children were huddled in the basement, guarded by volunteers with hunting rifles. She sprinted, Alex on her flank. Smoke grenades hissed in alleys, cloaking their movement. Evelyn's blade flashed in the dark, dropping one soldier before he could breach a side door. Alex's shotgun thundered, scattering the rest. At the church, hollow bells rang not for prayer but warning. Father Mark had chained the heavy doors, ushering families into the basement. Mercenaries tried to climb through stained glass windows but were met with shotguns from the choir loft. A pane depicting St. Michael shattered into a rain of colored glass, falling like holy fire. On the lake, motors roared. A boat with mounted guns sliced the water, its spray glinting under moonlight. But Alex's men had hidden in fishing skiffs, oars wrapped in cloth for silence. They moved like shadows. Molotovs arced through the air, crashing against the hull. Flames licked across water, reflecting like a second sun. The mercenaries leapt overboard, screaming into the cold dock. By midnight, Timber Lake was a battlefield. Windows glowed with fire. The square was littered with burned-out SUVs, the air thick with smoke and the metallic tang of blood. But the town had held. The invaders were broken, their bodies scattered, their retreat desperate. When silence fell at last, it was sharp, unnatural. Evelyn stood in the square, chest heaving, gun blackened in her hand. Around her, townsfolk emerged from cover, their faces pale but unyielding. They had survived again, and Reeves was still alive. They dragged him into the library basement, cuffed to a steel chair under a single bulb. His face was bruised now, blood at his lip, but his smile was intact. Isabel leaned against the wall, knife tapping against her thigh. Alex loomed close, fury barely contained. "Talk," Evelyn ordered. Reeves chuckled. "You don't even know what you're up against." "Holloway? He was a pawn. The Directorate doesn't need him. They have dozens more just like him." "The Directorate?" Isabel repeated, eyes narrowing. "They're the architects," Reeves said softly. "The ones who decide which ghosts live, which ones die, and which ones get sold like cattle. I was one of you once. Then I learned the truth." Loyalty is just another leash. Alex's fist slammed the table. You betrayed everyone. You betrayed the dead. Reeves didn't flinch. No, I survived. That's all any of us ever do. Survive. Evelyn studied him, her silence heavier than any threat. Finally she leaned close. You came here to break us from the inside. To make us doubt each other. It didn't work. His smile faltered. You're not a ghost, she whispered. You're just another man hiding behind shadows. They left him for Santos's men to collect. Timber Lake had decided they would not become executioners. Reeves would rot in a cell, his words caged with him. The next days were bitter. Funerals lined the lake, coffins lowered into the earth with trembling hands. Betty wept quietly over the baker's coffin, the smell of bread still clinging to her clothes. Donovan walked on crutches after a bullet tore through his leg, but he insisted on speaking at every service. They wanted to erase us, he said, voice raw. But we're still here. Children returned to the library, their laughter thin but stubborn. Evelyn read to them, her voice steady even when her hands trembled. The hero didn't win because she was strongest, she told them one afternoon. She won because she never gave up. The children didn't understand the weight beneath her words, but their parents did that at night. She walked the town's quiet streets. Every corner held scars. A burned shopfront, a cracked bell tower, bullet holes patched with plywood. But people were rebuilding. Hammers rang against nails. Windows glowed again with lamplight. Life was crawling back. Alex sat on the porch of their cabin by the lake, staring into the water. We can't hold forever, he said. Evelyn sat beside him, the cold biting through her coat. Maybe not. But we'll hold today. And tomorrow. And the day after that. Until they learn Timber Lake isn't theirs to take. Isabel visited one last time. She laid a folder on Evelyn's table, thick with names and coordinates. The directorate won't stop. If you ever want to strike first, you'll have allies. Evelyn didn't open it. She pushed it back. I'm not leaving. This is where I stand. Isabel nodded, respect in her eyes. Then God help anyone who tries to take it from you. When she left, silence filled the cabin. Evelyn walked back to the library, unlocked the door, and stepped into the scent of old paper and dust. She touched the spines of books, listening to their quiet weight. Children's drawings still decorated the walls, crayon suns, stick figures, smiling dogs. She sat at the desk, the same desk she had sat behind for years, and breath deep. For now she was not Spectre. She was Evelyn Ward, librarian of Timber Lake, keeper of stories, keeper of hope. Outside, the lake reflected the rising sun, gold spilling across its surface. The town was battered, scarred, but alive. And Evelyn understood at last. She could be both ghost and human, fighter and caretaker, legend and ordinary. Spectre would rise again if needed. But today, she chose to live. And Timber Lake chose to live with her. Timber Lake is not just a town on a map. It is proof that even the smallest community, when united, can stand against shadows that stretch across the world. Evelyn Ward, once Spectre, once a ghost, chose to fight not for glory, not for vengeance, but for the right of ordinary people to live without fear. And in choosing to stay, she became something greater than a weapon. She became a guardian of hope. The scars will remain. The battles may return. But Timber Lake endures, and so does the quiet librarian who would not bow. And perhaps that is the greatest victory of all. Thank you for watching this story. If Evelyn's stand inspired you, if Timber Lake's courage touched you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Your support keeps these stories alive, and together, we'll keep bringing you tales that remind us what it means to fight, to hope, and to endure. Until next time, stay brave and stay human.